reviewing a node that you have placed inside of the DGN file. So if I go ahead and select one of these inlets, or I can select my flared in section, and what you will get is this dynamic toolbar. And there's 4 options, at least for this particular node. First one is the physical properties. Second one is an option to update the catchment for the inlet, which is if you went through there and placed that inlet using the catchment delineation option, where it automatically went through there and grabbed your drainage area for it. This is where you can go through there and update that if you do move that node to a different location. Next one is the utility properties of it, which would be the hydraulic aspects of that particular node. And then the last one is to delete a node. So if I go to that first one right here that says properties, this will be the physical properties of that particular node. And you can see right through here, you can look and review all of those physical properties of that particular node. And there's a lot of stuff that you can change inside of here, and there's some things that you can't change. Things that you can't change are the stuff that's in gray. Either you'd have to go to a different location to change it, or it just doesn't have the ability to change it inside of this particular dialog box. Some of the stuff may not even be filled out, like this area right here for your spread and your flows. Since we haven't computed the network yet, it's not going to give you that information. So that's just some certain things that you have to look at and review for your drainage project that you have. So like for an example here, right now we're tied to a terrain. If we actually want to remove that terrain model and actually physically put in what our rim elevation or our ground elevation is, basically where that water's coming in at the top, we can go through there and change that. We can't change it right now because that is grayed out because it's tied to the terrain. So that's just one example to where we can come in here and change that. Another one that we could change, and we'll come back to that here in a little bit, is this use longitudinal slope. Right now it's set to true, so whenever it's looking at that terrain model, since we tagged to it for this example, the use longitudinal slope looks at those triangles for that particular terrain model and tries to interpret what the longitudinal slope is. Well, I know this one right here it's not 800%. That's not the actual longitudinal slope of that roadway. So I would need to go in there and possibly make some changes to that. And we'll come back to that here a little bit later on. Another one is your baseline reference. If you want to be the reference to your alignment, you could actually change that in this example right here to where it actually shows the proper station and offset. Let me get back to that dialog box here. You could actually change the feature definition right here. Instead of it being a 2x2 curved vein drain, maybe you want to change it to some other type of inlet. You can do that in this location. Now, if you do change it here, you may have to go back in there and review it and make sure it's in the correct spot and so forth for the location of how that new cell is placed. So that's just things you'd have to review on that. So like I said, a lot of stuff that you can change inside of here. And of course, it's going to change that particular node and change the location of it if you wish to do that. And we'll make some changes to those here in a little bit. The other one that you would want to review is the utility properties. So if I go to that, you have 2 different tabs up here at the top, utilities and drainage. We're going to use the one that says drainage. That way we can review the drainage properties of it. And you can go down through here and you can see that there's a bunch of different properties that you can look at for the hydraulics of that particular node. Some of the stuff will probably be grayed out because we haven't computed the network yet, but there are certain things that you'd probably want to review inside of here. So let's take, for example, here, like underneath the design, you have the design structure elevation. You can change that from true to false if you don't want it to design the elevation of it, what your sump depth of it is. Your freeboard, by default, it's set to 1 foot. If you need more on that, you can change that to more or less. Same thing for your flows here. If you know that you have a certain flow coming into that particular inlet, we can come in here and add it to one of these aspects here. And for like this one here, you really want to pay attention to the description of how it's being put in. So like for this one right here, for the flow, the additional carryover, that is the water coming in at the top of that inlet getting down into that cell and then getting to the piping system. Some of these other ones just deal with flow that's already known inside the piping system. So you kind of have to pay attention to what you're wanting to put inside of here if you wish to do that. And that's just one method of putting in your Q value for that inlet. Another one that you'd want to pay attention to, of course, is this longitudinal slope. You want to make sure it's set to the correct one, and we may need to change that accordingly, and we'll come back to that here a little bit later on, depending on how it's looking at that particular triangle for that terrain model. One that we will change, and you will need to change, is this right here. So for our inlets right here, you'll see that there is no catalog gutter assigned to it. You will need to assign the proper catalog gutter to that particular inlet or those inlets that are in your project. If not, you'll probably get an error whenever you actually run and compute the network later on, because it actually has to have a gutter type assigned to it to get your proper spreads and depth and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and make that change to this one right here right now. So I will go ahead and change my catalog gutter. For this example here, it's going to be curbing gutter type B. And you'll see that it automatically changes these attributes for your curb height, your crossroad slopes, and so forth. Because it's already predefined from that particular catalog gutter for that shape of that gutter. And that's what we're going to use for this particular project. So now I will go ahead and do the same thing to those other ones. So I did this one right here. Let me go ahead and select this inlet and do the exact same thing. And I will do it to this other one. Now I'm going to go back to this one at station 3 plus 00 because I know my profile of the roadway, this is actually in a sag, not an on-grade location. So what I will go ahead and do is select this particular inlet, scroll back down through here, and right here where it says inlet location, you'll see that by default it's set to an on-grade. So if I come in here and I change that, I can change that from on-grade to in sag. Now that tells the program that this particular inlet is in an in-sag situation, so it's going to try to compute everything differently than what it is on an on-grade situation. And for my clogging factor, I'm going to put in 50%, and that's just what we have stated in our engineering policy guide for inlets that are in an in-sag situation for a curb vein drain inlet. Now I could have came in here whenever I was placing the actual nodes. Let me go back to the actual tools. For the 2x2 and the 2x4 curve vein drains, there is one that says in sag versus not the ones that are in sag. So if I know the actual inlet is an in sag situation, I could have just went through there and selected that feature definition, and then it would automatically set this right here to that in sag. But you can also change it after the fact, just like what we did right here. So those are some of the options where you'd go through there and review your inlets before you actually compute it. That way it computes everything properly. So I know this one here is correct. I probably want to go ahead and check this one right here. And what I'm really kind of looking at is this right here for this longitudinal slope. Because right now it's looking at that, and you look at this right here where it says enter the slope of the roadway in the direction of flow, which of course the flow would be going this direction down into that sag inlet. Well, right now it's looking at that triangle and it's interpreting that as 800%, an 800% slope. So in that case there, it's actually reading the face of this slope right here of that curb and not the actual slope of the actual roadway. So this is where we need to come in here and change that. And like I said, that really is all depend on the exact spot of where it gets placed at. So that's just something that you will need to review. So to go ahead and change that, what I will do, since it's still tagged to that terrain model, I can't come in here and change that number. So let's say my roadway slope is 2%. So I'll type in 0.02 because it is feet over foot. You see that it won't do anything. So what I would need to do on this particular situation is come back to the properties of it. And you have the option right here that says use longitudinal slope. Right now it's set to true because it's using that terrain model. I can come in here and change that to false. And then now I should be able to come in here and put in whatever the slope is of that roadway at that particular section right here. So I should just be able to come in here and type in 0.025. And that would be my slope right in this area. One way to kind of check that is to come back to my home tab, go to the analysis, and I can do analyze between points. I may be able to do the analyze point also, and we'll try that here in a second. But if I do analyze between points, I can come in here and select the terrain model, and then I will just do a point from like right here to right here. And if you look up in this dialog box right here, you can see what the slope of the roadway is. So it's 2.67. So that's what I would put into this longitudinal slope right there. Let me go ahead and hit F4 to clear that out. Select that. And I'll type in 0.0267. So now if I select that, you'll say my longitudinal slope is that right there. So just kind of things to kind of keep in mind on that aspect of it. That way I get the proper spread width whenever I try to compute it later on. It'll give me the proper spread width and depth of that particular node at that location. Let me go ahead and do the same thing for this one right here. I will check it. You see it's 8. I need to go ahead and make the changes to that one there also. Change that to false. Well, let me go ahead and check the slope at that location. Select the terrain. .72. 0.0272. So now I should be able to select it and go to my physical properties of it. And you see that the longitudinal slope is set to what I just had right there. So that's what you would need to do after you place your inlets. You probably want to go through there and review those to make sure the settings are set correctly for those inlets that you placed, and also the flared in sections that you have placed in any other node that you have placed out there.